Hey guys, tonight we step into the shadowy world of China's most mysterious treasure, the Heirloom Seal of the realm, carved from the legendary Heirloom jade. This wasn't just a pretty cube of stone. For centuries, it was believed to carry the very mandate of heaven itself, the cosmic permission slip that said an emperor truly ruled with divine approval. Imagine holding a small block of jade and knowing that every throne in the land, every army and court, might bow because of it. But what if I told you that this jade seal didn't always stay in one pair of hands? That it vanished, reappeared, and brought whispers of curses with every new owner? Do you dare find out how it was done? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, I'd love to know where you are in the world and what time it is as you press play. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story begins not in a golden palace, but in a quarry, centuries before Qin Shi Huang unified the land. In the old state of Chu, a man named Bian He stumbled upon a peculiar boulder. To anyone else, it looked like rough stone, the kind you'd trip over on a muddy path. But Bian He felt something within it, as if the rock itself hummed with promise. He presented it to the king of Chu, only to be ridiculed when the royal lapidaries hacked away the shell and found nothing but jagged stone. For his trouble, the poor man lost a foot, punished for deceiving the throne, yet he refused to give up. Years later, he brought the same rock to the next king, and once more he was accused of fraud, and his other foot was taken. You'd think anyone would surrender after that, wouldn't you? But not Bian He. He clutched that ugly stone and wept, bleeding onto its surface until the jade smiths finally looked again. This time they cracked open the boulder and gasped. Inside lay a flawless piece of jade, shining like condensed moonlight, smoother than polished glass, untouched by centuries of earth. The Heirloom, they called it the Mr. He's jade. And so, through pain, doubt, and 2 severed feet, a stone became legend. Generations later, that same jade was reborn, carved under order of Qin Shi Huang himself. It became a square seal with a dragon curled into a handle. Its inscription read, "Having received the mandate from heaven, may the emperor lead a long and prosperous life." Simple words, but heavy with destiny. Imagine the ritual: silk unfurled, brushes dipped, and then the seal pressed downward, ink spreading across white parchment like sunrise over mist. It wasn't just ink, it was a declaration that heaven itself had signed the decree. You can almost feel the weight of it, can't you? Cold jade warming against a nervous palm, the ridges of the dragon's body under a thumb. An emperor might steady his breath before stamping it, as if sealing his own fate. And all the while ministers bowed low, believing this cube proved the emperor's right to rule. But doesn't it strike you as curious? Why would heaven's will need an object to prove itself? Could a dynasty rise or fall because of one artifact? Or was the belief itself the true power? What's certain is that from the moment the seal was carved, it became a magnet for ambition. Warlords, emperors, and rebels would spill ink, sweat, and blood over its possession. Yet for all its glory, the seed of misfortune was planted in its very creation. Some whispered that the cries of Bian He, wronged and mutilated, clung to the jade, that anyone who held it would inherit not just heaven's mandate, but also a curse of endless struggle. Picture the contrast. In the Qin court, shimmering bronze cauldrons stood in rows, incense curled in silver spirals, and scholars recited ancient hymns to celebrate the unification of all under heaven. And at the center of it, gleaming under torchlight, sat the jade seal, cool and perfect, as though it had never touched dirt or blood. Outside those walls, however, rumor spread that no empire, no matter how vast, could keep it for long. Perhaps it's coincidence, perhaps it's curse, but Qin Shi Huang, the proud first emperor, did not live long enough to enjoy eternal triumph. His dynasty crumbled within years of his death, and when the Qin palace at Shenyang went up in flames, courtiers, generals, and thieves all scrambled to claim the one object that might prove their right to wear the dragon robe. Can you picture it? Scrolls curling in fire, tiles crashing from the roof, soldiers fighting in the smoke, and somewhere in the chaos, the cool jade seal slipping from one grasp to another. If the seal was truly heaven's voice carved in stone, then who was heaven choosing now? The Qin dynasty, for all its walls and roads, crumbled like a paper lantern caught in the rain. Armies rose in rebellion, palaces fell to ash, and amid the chaos, the Heirloom Seal slipped into new hands. You can almost picture Xianyang, that night roofs collapsing under flame, lacquered beams snapping like thunder, and ministers clutching bundles of scrolls as they fled into the smoke. Somewhere in that inferno, a small jade block was carried, hidden beneath robes or wrapped in silk, protected with more desperation than gold or life. When the Qin throne collapsed, the land fractured into rival claimants. The seal, like a spark carried on the wind, drifted toward those who believed it could ignite their claim to the mandate of heaven. Among them was a warlord who would eventually found the Han dynasty. To hold the seal was not just to possess a beautiful stone. It was to silence the whispers that said, "You are just another usurper." The seal was evidence visible, tangible, that heaven itself had stamped its approval. But ownership came with unease. Every time a messenger lifted the silk-wrapped cube onto a table, courtiers bent forward to glimpse it, as though its glow could settle arguments that words could not. And every time the emperor pressed it into crimson ink, the brushstrokes of an edict seemed to thicken, alive with more gravity. Doesn't it feel odd, though, that men who commanded thousands of soldiers and held treasures beyond count still needed reassurance from a carved block of jade? Perhaps deep down, they feared their own authority was no more stable than the paper they stamped. During the early Han, the seal became both a blessing and a burden. Emperors displayed it proudly in court rituals, raising it high before altars as priests chanted invocations. Yet each time it was raised, the weight of destiny seemed heavier. Ministers muttered that if the dynasty ever lost the seal, heaven's favor might follow it out the door. The object itself became a prophecy. As long as it stayed, the dynasty could endure. If it left, collapse would be inevitable. And once an idea like that takes root, doesn't it start to shape reality? Whispers of the curse grew louder. Some recalled the misery of Bian He, who lost both feet before the jade was recognized. They said his tears had seeped into the stone, staining it with misfortune. Others swore that the characters carved into the base promising long life and prosperity were too bold, as if daring heaven to prove the opposite. The result? Every illness of the emperor, every drought or flood, seemed to echo with the seal's silent presence. Was it protecting, or was it condemning? Picture the Han court at its height. Pillars painted vermilion, bronze mirrors catching lamplight, dancers moving in rhythm with zithers. Somewhere behind a curtain, locked in a chest, the heirloom seal rested. Did the courtiers who bowed so low ever wonder who truly ruled? Was it the emperor on the throne, or the cold jade cube in the chest? As decades passed, the seal became the quiet center of palace intrigue. When succession crises loomed, rival princes stretched out their hands not just for soldiers and support, but for that single square of jade. One tale tells of an empress who clutched it during negotiations, sliding her thumb across the dragon-carved knob as if its smooth ridges might whisper advice. To concede, the seal was to concede legitimacy itself. Then came the collapse of Han authority, the rise of generals, and the division of the realm. As warlords carved their territories, the question returned, who has the seal? In a world splintered into banners, the cube became more powerful than 10,000 spears. Its journey from chest to chest, from palace to encampment, was marked not by ceremony but by bloodied hands and hurried rides through night. Yet always, in the minds of soldiers and ministers, the seal itself remained spotless, its jade surface as cool as ever, as though it absorbed nothing of the chaos around it. Isn't that the strange thing? While dynasties roared and burned, while cities rose and fell, the seal stayed the same, unchanging, indifferent, yet endlessly pursued. Perhaps that is why the notion of a curse felt so convincing. How could something so small and silent command so much turmoil, unless it carried a will of its own? And so, as the Han dynasty gave way to chaos, the seal prepared to enter yet another gamble of history, the deadly contest between Chu and Han, where every claim to rule would be tested. But when jade and ambition meet on the battlefield, who truly wins? In the early Han dynasty, the empire felt like a house rebuilt after a storm, its walls still damp, its beams still creaking, yet filled with the hope of shelter once more. At the center of this fragile new order rested the Heirloom Seal, no longer just the prized possession of Qin's vanished emperors. It became the visible proof that Han rulers were not mere survivors of chaos, but rightful heirs to heaven's command. Imagine a court audience beneath banners of bright vermilion, where ministers filed into a hall echoing with the thrum of zithers. At the front, on a table of polished wood, lay the jade cube. Its dragon handle glistened with a faint sheen, almost as if it breathed in the incense curling around it. The emperor raised the seal, pressed it into cinnabar paste, and stamped his edict. In that moment, the paper wasn't just a decree. It was destiny, warmed by ink, but bound by heaven. But with every press of that seal came weight not of jade, but of expectation. People whispered that as long as the seal remained in Han hands, the dynasty would endure. If it were lost, heaven's mandate would dissolve like mist at sunrise. Doesn't it seem uncanny how belief can become more solid than stone? A myth, once repeated, stiffens into something harder than jade itself. The emperors themselves felt the double edge. Emperor Wu, whose reign glittered with expansion and reform, often carried the seal during grand sacrifices. Priests chanted to heaven and earth, while he placed the cube on altars of bronze, its cool surface soaking in candlelight. Yet even he could not escape unease. Behind the solemn ritual, he must have wondered, was it truly heaven's blessing he held, or a curse carved long before his birth? The curse never left the whispers of the palace. Remember Bian He, the man who lost both feet because no one believed in his stone. Court storytellers claimed his blood had seeped into the jade, haunting it with sorrow. Some said, the inscription having received the mandate from heaven, "May the emperor lead a long and prosperous life," was too bold, as if daring fate. Each time an emperor fell ill or a rebellion sparked, attendants cast nervous glances toward the sealed chest that held the cube. Was the jade mourning its owner, or mocking him? For empresses, too, the seal became an object of trembling importance. One dowager clutched it during negotiations, her thumb tracing the dragon's ridges, as if drawing courage from the stone. For her, the cube wasn't just heaven's voice, it was survival. Without it, her son's legitimacy would falter, and her own safety with it. Even silk gowns and golden hairpins felt like armor compared to the cold reassurance of jade in her hand. Meanwhile, courtiers schemed in its shadow. Rival princes eyed it with hunger, believing possession of the cube could tilt succession. A seal could not command soldiers, yet whoever bore it seemed to command hearts or at least hush dissent. And so the seal became not only a relic but a chess piece. Behind folding screens, plans unfolded, which chest to guard, which servant to bribe, which general to woo. Think about how odd it is. The Han ruled vast lands, built canals, minted coins, yet their fate seemed to hang on a small square no larger than your palm. It is a reminder that power often needs symbols, visible, tangible objects that make the invisible believable. And when faith rests on an object, the object begins to rule as much as the men. As the dynasty matured, cracks spread, rebellions stirred on the frontiers, eunuchs tightened their grip within the palace, and noble families plotted in the shadows. Each time turmoil threatened, the seal resurfaced in whispers, "As long as we have it, we endure." But when generals began to rise like new suns, that quiet assurance trembled. Could jade still anchor a dynasty if the dynasty itself was adrift? And so, when Han power eventually fractured and warlords carved up the land, the seal became a prize worth more than a kingdom. Soldiers marched not just for territory, but for the chance to seize the cube that might prove their master's claim. In muddy camps and torchlit tents, voices murmured, "Who has the seal now?" By the end of Han rule, it was no longer enough for emperors to wear the dragon robe or sit on golden thrones. Without the heirloom seal, their decrees felt like whispers lost in the wind. And so, as the dynasty faltered, the jade cube prepared to enter a new chapter of struggle, carried into the desperate contest that history would remember as the War of Ambition. But in that brutal gamble between warlords, who would be bold enough to stake their future on a stone? The end of the hand left the empire cracked open like a clay jar dropped on stone. Shards scattered across the land. Warlords rose from those fragments, each proclaiming himself the rightful heir of heaven's favor. Armies marched beneath banners stitched in haste, drums echoed across valleys, and the question on every tongue was not only who commands the most soldiers, but who holds the heirloom seal. Among those who grasped for it were names that still resonate through China's long memory: Cao, Sun Quan, Liu Bei. But long before their rivalry blossomed, the seal had already slipped into play. Passed like a secret talisman through camps and courts, it became more than jade. It was leverage, bargaining chip, and sometimes curse. Picture a general riding into camp at dusk. His men, weary and mud-streaked, lift their heads as he unwraps a silk bundle. Within lies the cool green jade, carved with its eternal dragon. Even without words, the soldiers murmur, "If their commander bears the seal, surely heaven itself has signed their cause." Confidence like fire spreads from that tiny cube, But isn't it uncanny how faith in a stone could steady 1,000 spears? Yet the seal's journey was never smooth. At one point it passed into the hands of Yuan Shu, a warlord with ambition burning brighter than his means. When word spread that he had the seal, he declared himself emperor. But the heavens did not smile on his arrogance. His forces faltered, allies deserted him, and famine hollowed his strength. To rivals, it seemed proof that the seal carried a curse. Possession without virtue brought only ruin. Was it heaven withdrawing favor, or jade itself whispering misfortune? Others sought it with desperation. Couriers galloped through rain-slick roads, assassins slipped through silk screens, and whole provinces burned in contests where the cube was the silent prize. And still, within its polished sides, the dragon remained unmoved, indifferent to the blood spilled around it. Doesn't it seem as though the jade was mocking its pursuers, reflecting their faces without judgment? Meanwhile, the legend of Bian man who bled for the stone echoed again. Just as he was doubted and punished before the jade's beauty was revealed, so too were claimants punished when they reached for the seal without proving their worth. To some, this parallel was no coincidence but destiny. The curse was not in the object itself, but in mankind's ceaseless hunger to control it. In palaces rebuilt from ash, rival warlords paraded the seal to visiting envoys, pressing it into red ink, as if to drown doubts beneath a stamp. Yet beyond the throne room, whispers persisted. If the mandate truly rests in this cube, why do dynasties crumble, even as it is stamped? Such questions pricked at the edges of faith, though few dared to voice them aloud. The seal's presence in this era became almost theatrical, an actor in the grand drama of the Three Kingdoms. Each appearance shifted the audience's loyalty. Each disappearance redrew the stage. And like all good theatre, it left people wondering what was illusion and what was truth. Was the seal genuinely heaven's signature, or had belief alone made it so powerful? Through it all, the seal carried its paradox, a small, silent cube that could ignite wars larger than mountains. To warlords it was a compass pointing toward legitimacy. To heaven of fate it may have been nothing more than a mirror, reflecting human greed and ambition. And as the wars deepened, as banners tore and castles burned, the seal remained the one constant everyone desired but few could hold for long. Yet each hand it touched seemed to find not only power but peril. Which of the great rivals would prove strong enough or perhaps cursed enough to keep it? By the time the dust of the Three Kingdoms settled, dynasties rose and fell like waves against a shore. Yet the heirloom seal never lost its shadowy allure. Into the Tang era, poets, courtiers, and even emperors spoke of it in tones that mixed reverence with unease. The cube, once a clear emblem of power, now hovered between history and legend, as though it were both present and absent, an object, seen only when someone swore they possessed it. Imagine the Tang court at Chang'an, lanterns glowing against painted rafters, dancers moving in circles like constellations come to earth. The emperor reclines, listening to poetry recited under the sound of flutes. Somewhere in a chamber nearby, ministers claim the seal is safe, locked in a chest of lacquer and gold. But when asked to display it, the chest remains shut more often than open. Rumors seep through corridors like incense smoke. Had the seal been lost? Was the one they guarded merely a replica? Doesn't it feel strange that the dynasty most radiant with culture and wealth kept its most sacred relic half hidden, half imagined? Records from this period begin to blur. Chroniclers mention the seal in passing, as though repeating a rumor. Some claim it was displayed during rituals, pressed into crimson paste during imperial ceremonies. Others suggest it had vanished, carried off in times of rebellion. When the Tang capital was sacked in turmoil, whispers rose louder: was the seal stolen, spirited away by fleeing hands? Or was it quietly broken and recarved into ornaments, its power dissolved into fragments worn on belts and hairpins? In the Song dynasty, scholars debated not only politics and poetry but also the fate of the seal. Some insisted it was preserved in imperial treasuries, others believed it had vanished centuries before. What is remarkable is not certainty, but uncertainty itself. The mere question of the seal's existence carried weight, as if doubt alone could shake the legitimacy of a dynasty. After all, if heaven's mandate was bound to a cube of jade, then ruling without it might feel like wearing a crown without a head. Picture song scholars gathered in candlelit halls, scrolls unrolled across wide desks. They scribble annotations, correcting each other with gentle taps of their brushes. One writes, "The seal is said to remain in the palace." Another replies, "But no reliable record exists." In their quiet disputes, you hear the sound of history itself fraying. If even the keepers of memory could not agree, what hope had the seal of proving its own reality? For the emperors of Tang and Song, the seal became a paradoxical presence too important to ignore, yet too uncertain to depend on. So they invented their own symbols, new seals, new rituals, new ways to display heaven's favor. Yet every time crimson ink spread across a decree, courtiers must have wondered, is this truly stamped by heaven, or only by human hands pretending? In folk tales, the seal wandered even more freely. Storytellers in tier houses claimed it had traveled across deserts, fallen into the hands of nomadic chieftains, or sunk to the bottom of rivers where spirits guarded it. Children leaned forward on wooden benches as voices dropped low. Whoever finds it will rise to the throne. In this way, the seal lived on in imagination, passed from mouth to ear like an invisible torch. And doesn't that carry its own kind of power? A relic that might not even exist in the present, yet still compels loyalty, ambition, and fear. Perhaps the true curse of the heirloom seal was not that it brought ruin to those who held it, but that it enslaved even those who merely dreamed of it. As dynasties shifted and chronicles blurred, the jade cube became less a physical object than a legenda shadow at the edge of every throne room. Still, each emperor, poet, and general felt its presence like a breath on the neck, wondering if somewhere, in some hidden chest or forgotten tomb, the true heirloom seal still waited. But if it did survive, what form did it take? Was it still the flawless jade carved under chin, or had it been altered, scarred, or even cursed beyond recognition? The seal was more than a relic. It was a work of art, a creation where craftsmanship and superstition blended into one. Scholars later wrote of its shape, a perfect square of jade, cool and translucent, with a coiling dragon carved into the knob. To trace its ridges was to feel both the confidence of the craftsman's hand and the mystery of the power it symbolized. This was no simple ornament. It was a sculpture meant to hold heaven's voice. Think of the act of carving it. Somewhere in the workshops of Qin, a master artisan sat with the flawless Heshibi stone before him. He would have studied it under lamplight, turning it again and again, aware that any slip of his chisel might ruin not just a jewel but an empire's destiny. How steady must his hands have been, knowing that emperors would stamp their decrees with his work. Can you imagine the silence in that chamber? The faint scrape of tools against jade, the beads of sweat on a craftsman's brow as he breathed life into the dragon's form. The dragon itself was no random choice. In China, dragons symbolized imperial authority creatures of both cloud and water, bringing rain yet commanding thunder. To curl one into the top of the seal was to say, "Here lies the storm and the calm, heaven's wrath and blessing, all in the grasp of one ruler." Each time a hand wrapped around the dragon's body, the gesture implied not just control of jade, but of the skies above. And then there was the inscription, 8 characters cut into its base. Having received the mandate from heaven, may the emperor lead a long and prosperous life. Simple, direct, but perhaps too daring. Some whispered that such words tempted fate. If heaven truly grants its mandate, must one carve it into stone? Or does the very act of engraving destiny provoke the gods to test it? The line between blessing and curse blurred, etched forever in those strokes. Over centuries, storytellers embroidered this tension. They said that within the jade lingered the cries of Bian He, the man whose blood baptized the stone when kings refused to believe him. Others claimed the dragon was alive, its scales faintly shifting in torchlight, its breath trapped within. Still others believed that each time the seal changed hands, the dragon stirred, hungry for the next twist of fortune. Do you see how the object itself seemed to gain a spirit, as though carved art had crossed into sorcery? In court, even the act of displaying the seal became ritual. Servants unwrapped it from silks, bowed as they presented it, and spoke with lowered voices, as though too loud a word might wake something within. Emperors touched it with reverence, then hesitated, perhaps feeling that cool surface press back against their skin. Ministers looked on, with a mixture of awe and fear. It is one thing to believe in a mandate from the heavens. It is another to see it sitting in front of you, small enough to fit in 2 hands, yet heavy enough to decide the fate of nations. By the time poets described it, the seal had taken on an aura more magical than real. A cube of heaven's breath. One verse called it, a dragon asleep within jade. Another poet joked that it was the empire's most expensive paperweight. The gentle humor thinly veiled unease, because everyone knew that owning the seal never guaranteed peace. Instead, it often seemed to guarantee unrest, as rivals closed in like moths to a flame. And this raises a question. Was the heirloom seal truly cursed? Or was the curse simply humanity's endless hunger for symbols? After all, jade cannot march, jade cannot plot. Yet men killed, betrayed, and rebelled for the chance to touch it. Perhaps the seal's artistry was not only in the dragon's carving, but in the mirror it held up to human nature, reflecting greed, ambition, and fear back at those who sought it. Still, there is no denying the seal's mystique. When chroniclers described emperors raising it high before altars, the imagery was cinematic candles flickering, drums low and steady, shadows stretching as the dragon knob gleamed. In those moments, whether curse or blessing, the seal became alive. And maybe that was its truest magic. It made men believe. But belief, as history would show, is fragile. The seal, for all its artistry and whispers, was destined to slip again into uncertainty. And when it vanished, leaving behind only rumors, what remained curse, blessing, or nothing at all? By the later dynasties, the heirloom seal's trail began to fade like footprints in drifting sand. Chronicles that once spoke of it with certainty grew hesitant, their lines punctuated with words like, perhaps, and it is said. Somewhere between rebellion and conquest, between palaces looted and treasuries burned, the jade cube slipped from history's firm grasp. Imagine the moment of its disappearance. Was it carried by a loyal servant, wrapped in silk and hidden beneath layers of clothing as flames devoured the palace? Did it tumble into a river during a panicked flight, its dragon knob swallowed by rushing water? Or was it shattered, deliberately split into pieces to keep rivals from claiming heaven's voice for themselves? The stories multiply like reflections in polished bronze, each one plausible, none certain. One legend claims the seal broke in two during the chaos of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period. A later ruler, unwilling to let such a talisman remain damaged, ordered it repaired with gold. In that version, the jade bore scars like a wounded soldier, its cracks filled with shining veins that made it even more haunting. Another tale says it was recarved under a new dynasty, the inscription altered to fit a different claim of legitimacy. If true, then the object still existed, but transformed, a palimpsest of shifting power. But perhaps the most chilling possibility is silence. Some chronicles end abruptly, mentioning the seal in one line, then never again. No theft recorded, no destruction described, just absence. Doesn't it almost feel as if the seal itself chose to vanish, slipping into the folds of time to escape the endless tug-of-war over its destiny? Meanwhile, poets and storytellers kept the memory alive. In markets and tier houses, people whispered that the seal rested in hidden tombs, guarded by spirits unwilling to release it. Others swore it had crossed borders, carried into the steppe, or across the seas, waiting to reappear when heaven wished to anoint another ruler. Every rumor gave the seal more life than any confirmed fact. And doesn't that in itself reveal something? The more elusive the seal became, the more power its legend carried. When emperors could not display it, they invented substitutes, but each substitute felt like a shadow. Even in absence, the true seal cast a longer silhouette than any replica. For later dynasties, the seal's vanishing act posed a dilemma. Could they still claim heaven's mandate without it? Some answered with grand ceremonies, new jade carvings, and elaborate rituals. Others quietly avoided the subject, as though ignoring the absence might dissolve suspicion. Yet in hushed corners of the palace, ministers surely asked themselves, if the cube of jade is gone, has heaven's voice gone with it? As centuries passed, the seal became less an artifact than a ghost story. Scholars debated whether it had ever truly survived the fall of Han. Treasure hunters dreamed of stumbling upon it in mountain caves. Even emperors, secure in their palaces, must have glanced at their own seals and wondered, am I holding the real mandate, or only a counterfeit of belief? And so the heirloom seal, once the most tangible proof of divine legitimacy, transformed into absence itself, a blank space, into which every dynasty projected its hopes, fears, and doubts. But if the seal was gone, what remained of the power it was supposed to bestow? By the time the Ming and Qing dynasties reigned, the heirloom seal of the realm had become more rumor than reality. Palaces gleamed with new jade seals, some carved with exquisite dragons, others stamped with fresh inscriptions, yet none carried the same aura. The true seal, the one born from Heshibi, sanctified by Qin, coveted through centuries, was either gone or hidden beyond reach. And still, its absence lingered in every hall, like a missing note that made the song incomplete. Think about what this means. An empire could command millions of subjects, build fleets of treasure ships, and raise walls visible from the heavens, but the question remained: where is the seal? Even the most confident rulers must have felt its shadow, for if legitimacy was once pressed into parchment by a single cube, how solid could a dynasty feel without it? Later scholars debated the matter endlessly. Some claimed the seal had been broken and reforged, its original jade forever altered. Others insisted it lay buried in some forgotten tomb, waiting like a dragon in slumber to be discovered. And some, perhaps more skeptical, suggested the seal's very existence had always been more idea than object, its story enlarged across centuries, until myth and artifact became inseparable. Which is more powerful, after all, a stone you can hold, or a legend you cannot kill? What is clear is that the seal outlived every dynasty, not physically, perhaps, but in memory. Each generation spoke of it, argued over it, dreamed of it. Emperors who lacked it compensated with grandeur. Poets who mourned it spun verses that kept its spirit alive. In a way, the jade cube succeeded in sealing something far greater than decrees. It sealed itself into the imagination of a civilization. And doesn't that feel almost like heaven's true mandate? That a story, once born, can endure longer than any throne, longer than any empire. The seal's curse, or blessing, was to remind rulers that power is fragile, belief is fickle, and legitimacy is as much faith as fact. So tonight, as you let your eyes grow heavy, think of that vanished cube of jade, maybe shattered, maybe buried, maybe waiting in silence. Whether real or only remembered, it still whispers across time. Authority is fleeting, but legend endures. And now, as our journey with the heirloom seal of the realm comes to a close, let the echoes of history soften into quiet. We have followed a small cube of jade across centuries, through courts filled with incense, through battlefields dark with smoke, through whispers of curses and rumors of vanishing. Each chapter of its life revealed not just the fate of emperors, but the fragility of human belief itself. As you rest, imagine the seal not as an object locked in time, but as a drifting lantern floating across the surface of a still river. Its glow is faint, yet steady, reflected in the water, mirrored in the night sky above. The river carries it forward gently, away from noise and ambition, away from battles for power, into a place where legend and dream blend together. You might picture emperors long gone, their robes faded, their palaces reduced to dust. Yet the idea of the seal remains cool, constant, almost eternal. That is the quiet magic of history. Objects pass, people fade, but stories linger, woven like threads into the fabric of memory. The seal's greatest power, perhaps, was not to grant a mandate, but to remind every ruler that their time was temporary, their glory brief, their mandate fragile. Let that thought cradle you tonight. Just as emperors once placed their trust in a block of jade, you can rest in the knowledge that every worry, every ambition too, will pass into silence. What remains is the calm, the breath, the rhythm of time, itself gentle, unhurried, unbreakable. So close your eyes, let the story drift into dream, and allow the seal's final lesson to settle like dew, that peace lies not in possession, but in letting go.